And to me, the most valuable part of business is where money changes hands. If you want to build a business or be an entrepreneur, go into sales. There were 2 or 3 times in my career I took a significant step back in terms of dollars for experience. But I always thought about it as I'm getting paid to get an education. It's funny because I could be sitting here as CRO and feel really, really great, but if I wanted to be a C-level in a Fortune 100 company, what would I need to look like? Could I do that right now? That's a question I ask myself all the time. And then, but what am I missing then? I originally started as, you guys will love this, but a broadcast journalist. So when I graduated in communications, I went to Brigham Young University, and prior to that, I learned Spanish. I served a LDS mission in Argentina, lived there for a couple of years, came back, got married really fast. Like within the first 2 months of being home, I was married, and then went to Brigham Young University and was going to go into broadcast. I was going to be an evening anchor. Of all things, right? You can see it, right?
I can see it 100%. You got the personality.
Yeah, reporting live. So I actually did really well in the program. I had a job. I worked at Fox 13 News here in Utah as an intern, and then when graduated, got our job offer, and we were moving to Idaho Falls. It's kind of like a starter place to be the evening anchor there. And just before I was leaving, I walked through. They had a career fair at BYU, and I decided I was going to walk through, it was really in the last weeks of school. Like I was just finishing up, and I ran into a guy who worked for Intel Corporation. They were actually a supplier to Intel, but super interesting guy, like just smart, business savvy guy. We started talking, and through the conversation, he said, "You should at least apply for this business development position that we have. I think you'd be really good at it, and really, I think it would be a really interesting path for you." And broadcast journalism pays nothing, by the way. Like to start, like the good jobs are the high-end jobs in the big markets. So it's really hard to get to. But I had just had a conversation with my wife about like family time. Like the best jobs start at like 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon and go all the way till midnight. So you really don't see your kids. And I was like, it doesn't sound that attractive as I've gotten all the way through school and I'm ready to get started. And so anyways, long story short, I ended up leaving. I ended up taking him up on it, and I flew to Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's where Intel's was hiring out of, Rio Rancho it's called, and went and interviewed with him, and it went really well. And I got fascinated with just business in general and how sales functioned. We had really good conversations. I had pretty good awareness of kind of how things worked. Obviously in school you learn a lot about just the basics, right? So, but getting out there, realized I could do really well at this. At least I felt like I could. And it was, better paying, and I thought it probably was a better career path for me specifically in my skill set. And I took it. We moved to New Mexico. We were down there for a couple of years and, started in business development. Like they called it it's really an account executive role, but I was they called it a BDM at the time, business development manager for the Southwest territory, and within 6 months I was doing the best in the organization in terms of that level, and they moved me up probably within a year into I took basically the whole West Coast, and then it was probably within 2 years. I think I ended up being there for 8 years with this company. It was basically, they call it Intel Blue Badge, so Intel Corporation is who I worked for, but it was a supplier. Ended up getting into global business right from there. So, this is my job straight out of college. I was there probably in 4 years. Then the last 4 years I spent traveling globally, selling very large enterprise deals. Largest one was in Ireland, but we did Israel, we did China, spent a lot of time in China, and learned a ton during that process. They were big on training, like really big on training. So that's where kind of my love for learning the game and kind of what things worked and how challenger sell was huge. That was a big one for me, and you kind of see that in our organization today. But it's where I cut my teeth really on teaching, tailoring, and taking control, being a guide in the sales process. And so that was a really fun process. And shortly after that, I guess after that 8-year stint, I realized the global thing with my family and situation. I was traveling a lot. Realized that probably wasn't sustainable for the long term, so ended up transitioning into software sales, specifically here in Utah County, where Silicon Slopes was, and joined a company as a director of sales. Exactware was the company. And then they had a founder who actually spun off a company that I helped build their sales team for the first time. So I got a chance to kind of help build from an entrepreneurial perspective, which was fun. And then came over here as originally started actually as the director of sales, which was a small team here, called at the time Printer Logic, changed its name to Vasion, held the role as director, vice president of sales, senior vice president of sales, and now CRO since I've been here. So it's been a wild journey. Kind of seen all aspects of it, seen kind of the individual contributor, smaller team building and kind of really incentivizing and getting that going, and then obviously growing into what we have today, which is awesome. Yeah, we've grown fast.
You definitely have a good understanding of the entire sales organization. It feels like, Jed, just coming up through it. I almost want to go back to when you first got into sales. That's a big thing, I think, that I always want to understand. And when I look at my personal situation, I was in like a corporate 9 to 5 job, like at a really awesome Fortune 100 company. So I almost was in your spot, and I went the route I thought I wanted to go, with sales kind of like in the background of like, oh, that might be cool, but like push
Yeah.
that off. And so I ended up coming over to sales for a lot of reasons. But I'm curious, just for you, when you were in the middle of that, you mentioned the family stuff was big. We talk a lot about our athletic backgrounds, play a lot into why we enjoy sales, why we think it's a really great opportunity for people that are in that spot. But for the person in that same situation you were that's trying to figure out what the heck they want to do, and sales might be an option, can you just like run back to that and your thought process around that? What you
I was
might.
always fascinated in leadership and leadership principles. Like for me, even in the roles where I wasn't playing a leadership role, I liked to help lead, right? So if they were working on something specifically, I like to take on projects. And I was always like, yeah, I talked to you guys yesterday a little bit about this, but like the thought of like becoming, right? Like I wanted to be a certain type of leader, and then kind of figuring out what would it be, what would I need to do to be that type of leader was really fascinating to me. And I think sales boded well for, it set me up really well for having those types of experiences that I was interested in. I loved interacting with people. I loved negotiation. I love the tactics of like figuring out like how to create things that are beneficial to both parties. And so all of that process, like I really like as I started kind of learning more and more about it, it's like the best part of business. And to me, the most valuable part of business is where money changes hands. So who gets to be closest to the dollars changing hands? It's the salespeople. So you can go into accounting and learn business. That's great. You can go into marketing and learn business, but where do dollars actually change hands? And typically there's higher paying jobs in that too. Where dollars actually change hands, you'll notice this in any business. But where dollars change hands, those are typically the highest paid employees. It's just interesting. And obviously, me being competitive as well, that was interesting to me, making more money, and figuring out a way to where I could provide powerfully for my family was a very important part of it. But yeah, you get to do the business aspects of it, like all aspects. You learn about money, you get to learn about accounting, you get to learn about negotiation, but you also get to be where the action's at. And typically those are where the investments are made, is in the sales part.
So at what point, after just getting in the weeds with all that, did you decide that you wanted to get into leadership and make that transition?
I think I knew young, like even if you go back to like youth and like being like captains of teams, and getting those opportunities to kind of show up in a certain way, being a good teammate and helping other people along, and knowing that your team's only as good really as the leaders that help with that. Like if you ever notice, you guys being athletes, you referenced that your best teams, if you think about the best teams you were ever on, had really great leaders. It's just what it is. The team unity was really strong, and typically if it wasn't necessarily the best talent, it was who had that really strong leadership that was showing up in a powerful way. And when I served that mission, they do it same thing. They give you leadership opportunities. And I actually was they call it the assistant to the president at the time, but I actually helped run the mission. So it was like 300 kids that were my age that all, I got to help actually where do they serve in the areas and what they do. And like That started it, where you saw the impact you could have and really having a positive impact for people and actually change the experience that they were having. Just by the way you were showing up and the way that you were kind of guiding them. And you see that at work too. There's actually this principle I've been talking to my executive coach about. It's called the group of 10, that I think is fascinating. You can see this everywhere, but usually if you have 10 people, in a room, 2 of those people are going to be like high impact players, high energy, going to be kind of your leaders. You're going to have 3 guys that are a little bit negative and kind of yearning for the past. They hate change. You can see them. They're the guys that kind of complain a lot. Oh man, we used to do it this way. I don't like that. You'll see it in baseball team, everything. Why do we do this? Why are we practicing this now? Why do we do? And then you have 5 guys that are waiting for a leader to stand up. 5 guys that are going to go wherever the group goes. And if those 2 leaders don't stand up and take control of the team, pretty soon you've got 8 people that are negative. But when those 2 leaders stand up, you've got 7 people that are on board and ready to rock, and you've got these 3 people that quickly find out that they're the oddballs and they get themselves out of the situation, and you're able to upgrade. So if you can get those people, identify them, and really equip them to be powerful. So as you guys lead teams, and as you look at that, when you identify those people and you empower them and you get those people recruited quickly, I call it the enrollment conversation. When you enroll those people, you've built a culture. You build a culture of winning, and that happens, over and over. You see it everywhere. But that was kind of like some initial things for me that like leadership's fascinating, because you can take a company that's going to be like semi-successful or is going to be okay or has a really good product, and it can vastly change if you don't get the culture right and get the leaders in place that are going to help propel that.
Something you – I'm sorry, Seth. I was just going to say something you told me early on in like our one-on-ones was it was almost as if like you decided that you found more accomplishment in seeing others succeed when you helped them versus seeing yourself succeed. I'm just like, was that like a natural progression that you started to notice, or was it like always? The reason I ask is because as like I did hitting lessons for kids when I was in college to try and make a buck, and I almost liked when the dad would come up to me or send me a text message and be like, little Johnny just went 3 for 5 with 3 doubles, and parents are coming up to him and asking like what he's doing, and like I find more joy in that than like me doing.
There is that for sure. For sure. The interesting thing about most people, like I hear you say that, and I also say most people won't make the transition well because, let's be straight, especially as you're getting into like directors roles or managers roles, they don't pay as well. Most of us in sales have egos. Most of us are very competitive, and usually as they try to make that transition, it's a reduction in pay. So you have to be passionate about it, and you have to be playing the long game if that's where you want to go, leadership. Because if you're not passionate about and playing the long game of like, eventually I want to be a CRO, or eventually I want to be a VP of sales, so I'm willing to take these steps because I need to learn these lessons. But and generally it's pretty big. Like when I moved from individual contributor, where I was what we had Circle of Excellence, I was the salesman of the year like 3 years in a row. And I was making great money. It was awesome, big trips, taking my wife on awesome trips and doing all the fun things. When you step into that director's role, immediately they pay you different, because they're going to pay the top guys that are actually getting dollars to change hands a lot more than they are a guy that's going to manage people in that instance, right? So when you get into the director's role, as you move up the chain, that changes and there becomes more consistency. So, but if you got to be thinking about the long game. But yeah, to me, I was fascinated with it. And I thought it was really interesting. And so it was okay for me to take that step back, so to speak, in terms of dollars, because I really found joy in the process of other people winning and other people learning. Like there's like some, you call it coaching or what you want, but some secrets that you can work with people, and you start seeing them do the best work of their career. And, and they'll forever be grateful for it too. They'll call you years later and be like, hey, dude, you changed my life, man. You changed my career. And that's, you can't buy that with money. It's, to me, really rewarding.
It's just so crazy to me that you saw sales as a path to leadership. Jed, I think there's a lot of conceptions out there, at least when I was outside of sales is like some kind of gross car salesman type of thing. But I'm just kind of fascinated right now that you saw that as a path to leadership, like almost from the get-go, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think I probably had good mentors. There's a guy named Chuck Breinholt. Shout out to Chuck.
Shout out Chuck.
Chuck Breinholt. Shout out to Chuck. He actually became the president of the company I was working for. And at the time, he ran the sales division. One of the things he showed me early on, you'll notice this too. A lot of the greatest CEOs, if you go down CEO lists, a lot of them rose up through the ranks of sales, which is a super interesting, fascinating piece. And there's a reason, right? A lot of them, they get a lot of interactions with customers. They get a lot of they're constantly working cross-functionally. Like that's another thing that you like forget. Like people want to go into certain avenues, go into sales. If you want to build a business or be an entrepreneur, go into sales because you're cross-functionally working with, like you say, think about it, marketing, accounting, go down the list, product. You're giving
Product,
feedback.
legal,
Everything.
finance,
People.
literally
Yeah,
everything.
literally everything. Everything. You're touching everything as you kind of work across business and revenue operations, like the operations teams, business operations. You're working with all of them and data. You're learning business principles and how to work across these and successfully build businesses. And so we get a front row seat to that in sales. So I mean, naturally, it's going to help you grow into other leadership opportunities. There's risk with it. I mean, as you guys know, it's probably a little higher risk, but that's why they pay more too. But to me, the risk is way outweighed by the opportunity that you get to learn what business is really about.
I think for me, I realized, to your point, how much more stuff there is to sales than just sales. And to your point on leadership, I think really good salespeople are really good leaders, even if they're individual contributors just for customers. And I
Oh,
think that just gets taken out of perspective a lot when you're outside of it. But
well, think about this too. Like, I would hire an account executive for a leadership role, like obviously attributes wise, but like you don't necessarily have to have led a big team. You think about the amount of cross-functional work you do on working a deal. I think about the largest deal either of you closed this last year. How many times did you meet with, like the different parts of the organization? We talked about this, legal, and had really good conversations. How often did you meet with multiple people? I think they say, if this is still accurate, I think there's at least five different people that are involved in a buying decision on the customer side, at least that have to say yes. So your ability to start figuring out who those people are and mapping to that, like, and trying to affect change with people that aren't in the room. And then now, not to mention, you have to work with your CFO who wants trying to approve something. Your CRO has to be involved or whatever, depending on the deals and what you're working on. But then, yeah, you had finance involved. Like it's incredible the amount of leadership they have to show, not being their leader, those people's leaders. Because at the end of the day, when you're really good at sales, you get what you want. You get the deal structured that you want. That maybe the company was like, oh, I don't know, but you're able to influence people as a leader in a powerful way to propel the business forward and then influence other people on the other side in a powerful way to do a deal. And so there's so much magic happening in every single deal, and they're all unique. But you learn processes to follow, being a very good listener, asking the right questions, being a guide. We always talk about that, but like showing up as that guide and helping people both internally and externally, to have success. It's a really cool process. Like I said, I'm fascinated with it.
I guess as you've climbed the ladder and like grown more into a leadership role, I know you and I have talked off the side, and you have ambitions of eventually running a company or being a
Sure.
CEO and whatnot. But I guess just how have your roles changed? I'm sorry, your goals changed per role as you get closer and closer to a more CEO type position?
I got to be honest, like my whole view on, even since we've talked, changes. Like I, I'm on a journey to be a better human, a better communicator rather than I am about being a certain titled leader. Like, how can I show up in the most powerful way possible that impacts, obviously, to drive and help businesses grow? That's obviously got to be the point. But this goes back to like where I'm fascinated with leadership. Great leaders, and you can see them, man. They stick out. Like there's something different. You're like, what is so different about them? But a lot of times it's the journey that they're on to, become their best selves, but help other people. Like I say this to you guys a lot, but I want people to say that they did the best work of their career when they were within our organization. And wherever I go, I want that to be the case. That things that they tapped into a place that they didn't know existed and were inspired to be something, more than what they are today. And that to me, like the actual title, if that ends up being a CEO, if it's a CRO, if it's just, a VP or SVP in the future, wherever that ends up, like really I'm on that journey of self-betterment and kind of leaning into always improving, always working on myself so that I can show up more powerfully for others. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just something I'm really interested in right now.
No, I think it does. I mean, it almost seems like the path to a CEO is a byproduct of you focusing on things that other people would probably neglect. Like you have a lot of people that are like, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a CEO or whatever, but they kind of take for granted the soft skills that I think you focus a lot on, especially with your exec coach, that people push off to the side and say like, oh, I'll do that later, or like, but with your sense, like, and you've talked about this off the side and even yesterday, like the relationships you build and the type of brand you have up until that point is paramount compared to
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah. How you're occurring for others, you'll find if you want to be, it's funny because I could be sitting here as CRO and feel really, really great, but being in the room, you mentioned Fortune 100 companies that you're working at. If I wanted to be a C-level in a Fortune 100 company, what would I need to look like? Could I do that right now? That's a question I ask myself all the time. And then, but what am I missing then? Because I would say right now, no, right? Like I need to show up better. I need to occur for people in a more powerful way. So what does that look like? And then you start saying, am I willing to do the things that I need to do to make up that gap? And if I'm not, then you should be content with where you're at. You should be okay with being the best version of that. But if you say I am willing to make those sacrifices, whatever those are, maybe it means I need to read a lot more. Maybe it means I need to, make more time for certain things. If I say yes, I'm willing to do that, I should expect that I can show up in those rooms. And that's the decision you get to make every day of like, who do you really want to be? And then what does it look like to be that person? And then am I willing to do those little things to be that person? And so that's the journey I'm on really is like, I always think about the future rooms I want to be in. If I want to be in a board meeting in a Fortune 100 company, I got to occur a certain way for people. They got to see me as that. I know it sounds really weird, but they do. Otherwise, you're like a fish out of water. You're in there and you're awkwardly talking. Maybe you don't listen well enough. You don't structure yourself well enough. Like those things stand out, and a board won't take it. And so when you're thinking about where you're at, like I always try to shoot myself. Like I say, right now we're a company coming up in ARR. That's an awesome startup, great company, great story. But how can I be in the $500 million room? How can I be and if I act that way, I'll get there. I'll get those opportunities. They open up. So
it's been a huge shift in terms of goal setting Jake and I have had recently, I think. Definitely for me, but instead of saying like, I want to hit 400 this year and just making that the goal, almost saying, if I wanted to hit 400 this year, what would I do to make that happen? Yeah. And then it's like, I'd go to the cage every single day. I would hire a hitting coach. I would practice twice a day, and like making those the goals, and then hitting 400 takes care of itself. But I think too many people, and I used to do this all the time, especially in athletics, make outcomes the goal, and then like the inputs towards those goals, we don't necessarily think about as much or attempt to do those as much. So
yeah, you're nailing it, dude. You're nailing it. Like this is the whole talk of that, like you say, I talk to my executive coach about all the time. This is why I love objectives and key results. Like you'll hear me talk about this all the time, but if you're serious about goal setting, and what's the guy's name? It's Moore. Moore's Law. No, it wasn't Moore, but one of the Intel CEOs. God, it's going to come to me later, but he's the one that actually they call him the father of OKRs. Objectives and key results, and he wrote that's where I learned it is at Intel. But basically you set an objective, like you said, if I wanted to hit 400 in a year, you set that objective, but like you hit the nail on the head. The big difference, people always go, I want that and I'm going to work really hard. It's like, no, like break it down. What would you need to do? Like if you're talking about batting in the cage, how often are you going to the cage? How long are you going to the cage? Okay, what else? I'm going to get a coach. I'm going to get a batting coach. And what is that going to consist of? What time and energy and effort? Because at the end of the day, it's that process that ends up yielding the results. It's not like you say, the end one's just it's a number or whatever. But it's amazing how you may not hit that goal. Maybe you don't hit 400, but I guarantee you have the best season of your career. And that's what's interesting about it, is it's that process that you've created that ends up being the reason why you're successful.
And you're so much more fulfilled, I've found. Like, even if you don't hit 400, if you know that you did everything you said you were going to do and you don't hit it, then you can at least be really proud of the work you put in.
Yeah, and the funny thing with sales, like let's just say economic conditions, bad luck, different things happen and you didn't guess what you are at the end of the year? You're a better person. You're more equipped, you're better able to. And so when when things align, you want to have that 500, that $500,000 year or $1 million year in sales, you can do it. But you got to be equipped to handle it. And all those things come together and you're able to really accelerate your career by having that happen. But the one thing you can say is every year I'm better. I know sales better. I've worked, because of the little, incremental things that you put in place to ultimately, and it does come together. I mean, it's weird how sales works, that inevitably the people that do the little things end up having, they call them like, oh, I got a bluebird or whatever. No, like that usually happens to somebody who's, call it the sales gods or whatever, but something happens to the guy that's grinding. The little things come together where it's like, man, how did he get that big deal? That dude's doing work. He's doing a lot of work. So just inevitably some good things happen a lot of times.
I think the shift that Stutz and I have talked a bunch about too, and I think we have too, is a complete paradigm shift, is focusing on a longer time horizon and building your endurance in your career. And so like a lot of people are like, oh, I want to, be a CEO, or I want to hit 400, whatever it is. And it's like, I want a 6-pack. I want to lose 20 pounds. And it's like, people see people in those positions and they're like, man, I want that. But they don't understand that they've been doing this game for 20 years to get to this point. Like the things they had to go through, you had to put your marriage at risk by traveling to put food on the table. Like people in the big leagues, they had to go through hours on hours of training that other people aren't willing to go through to get in this position. And so like being able to see things on a longer time horizon and understand the amount of time it takes to be successful at that point, I think is completely shifted the way we think about things. And it's not like I want to make $1 million. It's like, well, dude, that might not happen till you're 40 years old. Like, are you willing to be in the game that long for it to happen? Because not a lot of people are.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I wish I could go back and talk to my younger self too. Like that's really good advice you're giving yourself and others is play the long game. Be obsessed with, back to the process. I promise you, like I can stand here and I can see it, that those that stay in the work of just getting better, that takes care of itself. That ends, but you get obsessed with the end result then and less about the process of growing. And like, because I mentioned it, you're going to have opportunities. Both of you will have this happen, where an opportunity will open up and you have to just decide, do I want to take that role? Maybe it's a director's role, maybe it's a manager role. And you're saying, I eventually want to be a leader. Like I want to be a CRO. Let's just use that as an example. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to get this experience. And so if you have the goal of that's where I'm going, this is where I'm going to end, what things need to be true to get there, and you're willing to make sacrifices. Because if you're just trying to make money fast, you're not going to end up where you want to go, and you'll make decisions based on, oh, they're going to pay me a little more, and all of a sudden you'll find out you're not happy. Like, holy cow. But if you're thinking, I do want to make money, but this is how I want to do it, then you'll make the steps required to do those things, and you won't get caught up in the short term. Like, oh, I'm going to make $100,000 more here, or $50,000 more here, whatever. Play the long game, and then, like you said, by 40, you'll be in a situation where you're making way more money than you would have, and you'll be doing the things that you wanted to do. You may get opportunities earlier in the process, but focus on the process, of making that and creating that. But a firm believer of those who know what they like, start setting goal, what they want to will become that thing as in the process of it. So So it's like I said, it's just super fun.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday and kind of on this topic, and it was about investing. It was the Morgan Housel. He wrote like the Psychology of Money, and he was talking about how Warren Buffett made 99% of his wealth after the age of 60.
Yeah.
And so, like 60 years old, he was worth like, I don't know, $2 billion. But at like 65, he was worth $200 billion.
Yeah.
And so, like the message of the story was like the best investors or the best or most successful people, like they don't necessarily do things better, they just do it longer.
Yeah, they're consistent.
Yeah, it was like the whole motto was like the best investors are the ones that forget their password to their Charles Schwab account, like because they don't check it. Like they continually put money in, they play the long game, knowing that regardless of what happens, they're just going to stay in the game. And so
I used to envision, this is how I got myself around it when I would make decisions. And my wife was so supportive, but like there were 2 or 3 times in my career I took a significant step back in terms of dollars for experience. But I always thought about it as I'm getting paid to get an education. Like you can go back to school and go to school for 10 years and keep trying to learn, or you can learn through actual experience, which to me is a lot of times more beneficial than going and getting the book out and trying to have someone teach you something. Like let's get in it and get messy. And so I would, in my mind, kind of visualize this is my education. I'm investing in my education right now. And as long as I felt like I was still learning and growing and challenged, I was in. But as soon as I felt like it was dull and I wasn't getting opportunities, like you say, to interface and do all the things we're talking about or getting at the tables I wanted to get at, that's when it was kind of the decision of, okay, it's time to take the next step or it's time to do the next thing and get where I want to go. But like, it's so funny now, like I've been here 6 years already and I'm still just super challenged and, continue to grow and learn. And, I see that being the case for a while. So it's just amazing when you say like, I'm just right now investing in myself. That was a way for me to look at it, especially as I was younger.
Yeah, especially too with on that topic, like you're just compounding the skills and the knowledge and the learnings up until your point. Like you've been acquiring skills and knowledge since you were 25 years old when you first took that Intel job. And so now it's like everything is compounded to being the CRO of Vision. Yeah. Who potentially will be like when you do become a CEO or you do start your own business, like it's just it's just building blocks of knowledge up until this point. And so like, that's
why it's so important that you build a house on a firm foundation, man. Like too many people try to rush it. Like back to your point, like you don't want to build a house on a brittle foundation. So like rushing it and not like just taking the time to, my coach calls this the discomfort, like the uncomfortable things and shying away from things you don't want to do will build a brittle foundation. I don't really like the negotiation part, or I don't like, go do it. Do the stuff you think sucks the most. Like do it. Learn it really well. Lean in, do it, and know that right now you're investing. You're building a really firm foundation, and then when you go to build the house, you're going to have a mansion, right? You're going to have a really, really great home, but you got to do the work. And most people, I literally put it into like the 90% of people do not want to do the hard thing. You've read all the books, the comfort crisis and all those things. People want comfort. And those that are willing to do the harder things and invest in themselves and make the harder decisions, the comfortable one is just take the better paying job. The comfortable one is to do the easiest job, but the hard one is to be really deliberate about what I'm trying to learn so that I can become, right? That's harder, but that's the guy who, 10 years from now, you're gonna look at it and go, dang it, I wish I would have invested like that. Dang it. He leaned in and learned the things I should have learned. And I'm still I've got guys that I worked with at Exact where, this is, how long has that been ago now, that are doing the exact same job we did when I left. It's fine. They're great and they're incredible humans. That wasn't my journey. So it required me to take different steps that, they make great money and they're doing well for themselves. It just wasn't what I wanted. And that's what would have happened if I, didn't decide to take some, call them risks or steps in different directions. So
I think that's such an important perspective to have though, of you're getting paid to learn. And what other situation can you really get paid to learn something as important as persuasion and like we already talked about from a sales perspective, every facet
Yeah.
of the business, even if you're not making that much money as a BDR or an SDR. Like in my situation, I took a significant pay cut from where I was at to
Yeah.
come be an SDR here. And it has absolutely been the best decision I could have possibly made. Probably the best decision I've made in my entire life because of that. Because you just get paid to learn.
Yes.
It's just insane.
Yeah. Those are the decisions that you'll look back. You say you'll look back and you'll have an incredible career with all these amazing moments, but you look back and say, if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be here. Like it's a fork in the road, and you chose to take the fork. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You chose to take the trail that was harder, but now you have a way better view, or you will have a better view at the end of the hike, right? And you have to do that over and over again, though. Knowing what you want to become, right, or knowing where you want to go, that allows you to take those, what people would call, people told me I was so stupid when I left Exactware. Told me I was the dumbest person. I was making great money. It's so easy now. You can do it in your sleep. That's the problem. I can do it in my sleep. That's the problem. I'm not learning. I'm not growing. I'm not getting better, right? And so it's and if you're on that journey of becoming that was a problem. And like I said, I see it to where I'm not where I'm in a way better position now than I was then, but it required really hard times. And we're talking hard years of leaning in and learning and financially changing some things with my family. And I'll forever be grateful for, like I say, having the support from family, my wife specifically, to take those jumps and have her know that it was trust that it would work out better for us in the long run.
Absolutely.
Kind of taking a pivot. You said this earlier of like wishing you could talk to your younger self and tell him these type of things. So I guess piggybacking off that thought, if you could go back to being 25, 26, 27, knowing what you know now and kind of the progression you've taken and where you wanted to be, where would you be focusing your time, energy? What would be some of the things you're thinking about in terms
I
of?
probably would have looked into leadership coaching earlier. I didn't even know it was a thing. Like I think that, that's one thing I wish that probably it's probably a need in the market really is more cost effective ways to do it. Because they call it transformational work, but you'll watch people that get executive coaches and they'll like actually show up differently. Like you'll watch them, you'll be like, well, that's like kind of a different human. Like they keep they still keep their personalities, but you watch the way in which they interact because there's so much happening where you don't even realize most people are in reactionary mode. Most people are reacting to the circumstances around them. But when you can transition things to where you are in control and occurring for other people, you know what you're doing. You walk into a room and you understand that, that people are experiencing you and you can control that. Man, you change everything. Like you can change the way that people are experiencing you because you understand, like call it a game, call it what you want. But there's just some things that when you go through transformational work, that they talk about how you're occurring and, realizing that truth is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. Like Jake, the way you grew up, and the way, Stutz, the way you grew up is different than me. So your truth, the way we're going to arrive to something is going to be very different. So for us to argue over something it's pretty dumb. In fact, what would be more powerful is for us to understand each other. For me to say, well, why do you think that way? Walk me through your process rather than saying that's wrong. Right. And you see that all the time where two people argue over a point. And these are the type of things that most people just don't know or don't do. And I call it like being asleep. And if you can play the game awake, you have such an advantage. And I just don't, it's like you say, it's only in the last maybe 5 years that I felt like I was awakened from a sleep of reaction to, oh, I know what's going on. And now you have an advantage in the game of life. So there's just things like that I think if I'd have known in my 20s, and maybe I wasn't in a place to receive it. And so, maybe that's just the cycle of life that I'm at a moment now where I'm receiving it differently. But I would say that I'd also tell my younger self, be patient. Be patient with yourself. You want to win right now. You want to have the money right now. You want to have the success right now. Be patient and enjoy the work. Don't get so anxious to be in a different place or have that job or have that thing. be back into the learning conversation that we were having. And then the last thing I would say is keep going, dude. You better things are ahead. Keep working, keep grinding, and I promise you things will work out. And, that would be like, I think, a really powerful thing for me to have heard at the time. But yeah, the coaching stuff's underrated, man. It really is.
Had so many thoughts just popped in with things you said. The first one on the kind of leadership side of things. So I went to a Black Swan negotiation event in New York to learn from Chris Voss and his whole team, and I think that put a lot of things in perspective for me because I was there going to learn how can I get better at persuading people to buy what I sell. That was my intention going in because I had kind of gotten bullied in a negotiation prior, and that was like my reasoning for going. But I was sitting at this table with a bunch of other people, like, oh, like, what are you guys doing here? Like, what, who do you work for? Whatever. And I was probably sitting with 6 or 7 people, and 3 out of the 4, whatever, were dudes that were struggling in their marriage. And they were there to learn how to be better listeners and communicate better in order to save their marriage. And so I was like, oh man. And so like you kind of said it earlier on and it triggered that, but it was like so many people focus on like, how can I be better at sales? How can I be better at negotiating or whatever it could be? And people neglect the fact that like, you have to also focus on being a better human, which translates to those type of things. And
Yeah, dude, I love that, Jake. Almost you can spend a lot of money on executive coaches, like and you guys, I'm sure on a certain path you'll have different exposure to it, but like one of the major things they work on, which is back to your point, like people go to these things is like the way you are at home is the way you're occurring at work. So like working on yourself, on how are your relationships with your wife? How are your relationships with your family? How are your relationships with friends? And then all that stuff matters because you can use very similar, and you should be using very similar, back to the occurring, like you're occurring for these people in a certain way. Are you paying attention to how that is? How are you occurring for your kids? Your future kids, like how are you occurring for them so that because you're creating experiences for people all the time. And you start realizing that some of the best work you can do, when you have a very stable, healthy home life, man, you bring a good self to work. So like that's a really important aspect of it is being healthy and well-rounded, right? I always talk to you. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, Jake, but like there's being mentally healthy, spiritually healthy, physically healthy. The other thing I would say to my younger self, and luckily I loved this stuff, but keep exercising. Dude, that's going to help you mentally. You're going to have a mental edge. You're going to go to work. You're going to be crisp. You're going to have a clearer head. Whatever your spiritual outlet is, meditating or whatever that is for you, whatever that means for you, search it, seek it, like be a part of it and be okay with it, whatever that means. Like I said, that goes into the mental wellness to me. Like you'll be more mentally healthy and better able to listen and it kind of helps you, I think, too, with back what we were talking about, helping understand people, how they came to certain reasons for things and how their thought process worked and understanding their truths. And it just helps you be more powerful.
This concept of occurring for people, Jed, that's obviously a very common theme. Can you break that down a little bit more? What do you mean exactly when you say when you're occurring for
somebody? There's a course that actually comes out of Arizona, by the way. It's in Phoenix. The gentleman, he actually is the executive coach for our CEO. Brandon Craig's his name. He has a course called OnToCore that's really good. And there's been a lot of different software companies get into it. I probably won't go in depth with it because it is his work.
Yeah.
But I've given you some things about like what that is in terms of understanding people and their truths. Occurring for people is when you wake up to the reality that the way you see a situation, the way I see a situation is vastly different, almost in every circumstance. Then it wakes you up to the reality that, like I say, the way that you think you're occurring for people too is going to be different than it probably really is. And so you start being a little bit more thoughtful about, what words you use, how much you speak, how fast you speak. It's funny because, and they'll talk about this a little bit too, words matter. What words are you using in conversation? What tempo, what tone do you have? All those things. And it's just one of those things where you don't think about it when you're younger. You're just doing business. And then you start realizing, oh, that's actually a really strong tool that I have in my tool belt that if I perfect, people are going to listen to me more. They're going to want my opinion on things. They're going to want me involved in more important decisions. But that's all by, what I'm saying is occurring for people, how you're occurring for somebody, because you could be amazing, but you're just not occurring properly. So people are like, no, not Braden, not Stutz. We're not going to get him in this when you, in fact, would have been the best person to do it. It's just, so that's kind of some of it, but it's a great course. It's a great course. He does I think he does a seminar twice a year in California, and then he obviously does executive coaching. He's a very high-end executive coach that does really good work.
It's awesome. If I were to summarize it, it seems almost like just having a really clear understanding and ability to shape how people are viewing you or how people see you.
Yeah, 100%. And people so funny when you start talking about it, some people be like, sounds like manipulation. Like I've heard somebody respond I feel like you're trying to manipulate a room or something. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's
clear
not
communication.
Very clear communication and being cognizant. Like you say, most people, I don't know how you guys felt before this, but I felt before I started having conversations about it 5 years ago, I wasn't even thinking about that at all. All I was thinking about was solving the problem we were working on. I was just showing up and trying to prepare for the conversation, but I wasn't thinking anything about how might I keep using the word occur, but how might they be experiencing me as I'm having this conversation? And is it powerful? Does it bode well for them to help hear my ideas and be interested in my ideas? Or is it going to make them minimize or reduce or not want me a part of future conversations? So it's a powerful thing to start getting a grasp of. And it takes, by the way, I always talk about the baby giraffe. It's like trying to walk. Like when you're learning these things, it's awkward. And that's what it's supposed to be. And so it's just those that lean in and do the work, then they end up running. They end up, those powerful leaders, you're like, holy cow, that guy's a stud. Every time he comes in the room, I'm blown away, right? Well, he was awkward first, I promise you. He was learning to figure out how to show up that way and how to work through that thing. Even with some people that have natural gifts, it's still, they have to kind of work and lean into it. So the real work is being okay with being embarrassed, like stumbling, being a little awkward sometimes. I'm sure, Jake, when you came out for the negotiation training, sometimes you're like, that was stupid, I didn't do it right, or I tried this, it didn't work, But if you don't try and you don't keep working on it, you don't get better at it. So that's the same thing with that occurring thing. I feel like I go through this all the time where I'm like, I leave a meeting, I was like, dang it. Dang, that was not hitting 400. I just struck out, man. That happens, more than I would like it to. But you also, like you say, when you're in the work, it starts happening less.
So, yeah, I don't know what that quote is, but it's like, good feels weird when you've been doing weird for a long time.
Yes.
I always used to say that in baseball when you make an adjustment in your swing or whatever. But
it's actually funny that I just had a guy tell me this, that he taught his kids to line his knuckles or something like that. He was talking about it and said the kid kept saying, I feel like I look stupid. He goes, no, you don't look stupid. You think you look stupid.
Yeah.
You feel awkward because it's new to you, right? But I look so stupid, right? And I'm sure that's how when you leave a room, you're like, oh, I looked so stupid in there. No, you didn't. You felt stupid because it's new to you. You were thinking everybody was thinking that, right? It's kind of funny. This goes back to the coaching stuff, but and this may or may not be the same thing for you, but there's a difference between being good and wanting to be perceived as good. Same things. When we're starting to talk about this, when you're really concerned about being perceived as something, I want to be perceived as the leader more so than I want to be the leader. All you're trying to do is appease people and trying to figure things out, and that goes back to this awkward in the room and trying no, try to be the leader, try to be the person. Don't worry what other people say or what they think. You're worried that, did they think I was awkward? Who cares? Who cares? Be that person and go and be in the work. And, there may be moments where you could have done it better, but you're in the work and it's okay.
I think that's been a huge shift too, is just knowing that, like, one, everything is trainable, but then just having kind of the ease of mind saying, like, my first 100 times doing this, I'm probably going to suck.
Yeah.
But then my next 100, I'm going to suck less. And then my next 100, I'm going to suck less.
And guys like you and me hate sucking at anything.
Well, the thing is, like, people only like doing things that they like.
Or that they're good at.
But the caveat is, in order to do something you're good at, you probably have to suck at it. And so it's just like getting over that hump of, maybe you want to ski or snowboard for the first time. Like, your first time going down the hill, you're going to eat it the whole time. But, after your 100th run, it's going to be a lot better. But the trick is how many people make it to that 100th run. I think that's a huge separation between the majority and those that sit at the top.
That's so true. Like, being comfortable with, they talk about this all the time, being comfortable to fail. But, like, there's a reason why I have my kids play sports, Jake. Like, you're nailing it on the head. There's a reason why, because there's so many lessons in this exact thing. Like, it's so funny when you break down a list of the batting order of your kid's team or something, and you look at it and you go, okay, if you were to rank these people, where would you want to rank? Right? You got almost every kid's like, I want to be the best. Okay, cool. Well, what do you think the best player's doing? Right? And it's like, well, he's probably batting every day. But you'll go down the list of things, and it's like, all right, well, you say you want to be that, but are you willing to do all these things? And what that's going to mean is for an hour and a half a day, you're going to be doing these things every day. No questions. And, I have kids that, like, yes, and they do it, and you watch them excel. Then you have the other people, which I'm pretty lucky because my kids are pretty driven, which has been fun to be a part of. But, like, then you have the ones that go, maybe I'm okay being like 7 or 8. Like, what does 7 or 8 mean? And they're like, well, 7 or 8 guy probably just goes to practice. Oh, okay, yeah, I'll just go to practice then. I'm going to be 7 or 8. And that's the enrollment conversation, because I even have that at work, dude. Like, you have it with people where you're like, I want to be the leader. Cool. Do you know what leaders do? They're going to show up at this time. They're going to be in this. They're going to read these books. They're going to come, and prepare. They're going to do. You list that thing, and then you see them kind of go, what does the individual contributor do? Like, I'd rather do that. Like, and they kind of opt to themselves out once they see the work that's required to be what they think back to being perceived. They want to be perceived as something rather than they want to actually be it. So it's pretty fascinating. That enrollment conversation when you get into leadership is awesome. When you ask somebody what they want to be, and then you go, well, what does it take to be that? And then they kind of lay it out, and you watch in their face. Some of them are inspired by it. They're like, hell yeah, let's charge the hill. And you're like, let's do it. Let's go make it. Let's go make that. And then you have the other guys that are kind of like, yeah, you know what? I really like my life. It's like, cool. Then run your life, because it doesn't make you bad. It's not even an indictment on anybody. It helps you reset that. Don't expect to be that with the amount of work you're willing to put in.
I think we've talked about this a lot, but I think too many people get stuck in that to where their goals don't align with the amount of work they're willing to put in. And either, like you said, is okay. Like, if you want to make $1 billion, great, but, like, it takes a certain level of work. And if you don't do that, then maybe just be okay with $100,000. Like, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
The first session of my coach, mine's name's Dane Saunders. Shout out to Dane. That guy's an absolute beast, stud. He does a lot of, like, health coaching as well. So a lot of his stuff does with sports, or at least he's an endurance runner. So a lot of stuff comes back to, like, training and, like, what are you doing? So hard work and doing uncomfortable things. But in our first session, it's like my favorite thing. I get in there, I'm like this bright-eyed, excited. I've had 2 coaches. This is my 3rd one, and the last one was good, but I just was, like, ready for something different. I get in there and he goes, like, why do you want to coach? And I'm like, I'm kind of like, well, I want to be better, and you want to do this. And he's like, you have a pretty good life. He goes, make good money, right? I'm like, yeah, you do pretty well. He's like, kids doing good? I'm like, yeah, I love my kids. Family's great. And he starts going through this list, and he goes, you're a good looking guy. He's like, life's good for you, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good. And he goes, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing here? Like, you should be pretty content, because you could keep doing exactly what you're doing right now and have the life you have right now. Do you love it? And I'm like, yeah. So, like, you have this realization, like, but But the truth is, guys like you, guys like me, aren't okay with just being that. We want to keep learning, keep growing. So you start having that conversation of, it doesn't make you bad and doesn't mean you won't have a good life. You just got to be a realist. That like, we talk about future rooms. Like if I got pulled into a future Fortune 100 company C-level job and I wasn't willing to do the work, like wasn't willing to keep progressing and growing, I just like to do what I do all the time and just stay with it. And I'm gonna probably not have that job super long. And guess what? I'll probably be lower and down the line less than where I was. So like, I think having that realization of what work are you willing to put in? Do you really want it? And at what level do you want to like be comfortable and be happy with, right? And kind of recognizing it for yourself. Being okay with it, like I said, does not make you a bad person. I know plenty of people here at Vasion that are amazing, that have determined they want to do what they're doing. That's the level of work they want to bring, and they want to have a different balance at home or whatever, right? And I think that's great. You got to have all types of humans. But usually doesn't work for guys like you and I. Sadly.
No. I don't know
haunted by trying to get better, trying to keep climbing, trying to keep growing, for better or for worse. Sometimes your wives love it, sometimes they hate it.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, just about in terms of like the amount of money I want to make. Like I grew up and money was like kind of taboo, and like you don't really talk about it. You shouldn't want money, and like I don't know, I just never felt that way. And like for me now, I've come to the realization, money, doesn't matter to me whatsoever. I just want to be the person that can make $1 million in a year. Like I want to become that type of person. And then once I can do that, it'll be 10 million or whatever. Like it's just going to change based on the person I want to become.
100%. No, you're nailing it for me too. That's how I feel. Is like you wouldn't ever know if I made more money or less. Like I live a very similar lifestyle that I did 10 years ago. 5 years ago. I mean, I don't have crazy things or whatever, but it's more it does, and I need people to say it doesn't create some freedom. It gives you some opportunities, right? It allows you to do things that some people don't get to experience. So it is awesome, but at the same time, it's like, if that's what you're obsessed with, and in my case, I think that wouldn't have been the right look for me. So my family, I grew up, my dad was a truck driver. So was saying we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of opportunity. And I always wanted to make good money. It was something that was on my bucket list. And I don't think that makes you bad either. The deep desire, if that's what drives you, I say that's awesome. For me, it was probably a little bit of a way to keep score. Right?
It's always got to be a scoreboard, Jed.
Exactly. Isn't it sad? That's what it comes back down to. So finite, Jed. So finite.
It's not. It's just a proxy, again, for the person that you're becoming, which is the whole point.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, all of us well, I shouldn't say all of us. All of us are driven differently. But for me, going back to kind of circling back to the very beginning is I want to be, like you said, on your deathbed, you want to be able to say that I had an impact on people in a positive way and that I helped them be inspired to live a better life. And you can't really inspire people from below them, if that makes sense. If you're going to rise somebody up, if you're going to lift, you're going to have to be on higher ground. So the higher ground you can get on, the more people you can impact. And that's important to me. So, I'm going to try to get myself in a position that I can help more people. And that's where I'm at. And that doesn't necessarily mean financially help. It just means be a mentor, be a guide, be a help, and be in a position where I can try to lift others and help them get where they want to go. So, yeah, it's all part of the journey.
How much of a frame of it do you think of it as like when we have these goals, or anybody has a goal of like stepping back and be like, am I the person capable of having that yet? Like whether it's like, oh, like I want a beach house. I want to be in a boardroom with the Fortune 100 shareholders, whatever it may be, like just kind of taking a step back and saying, like, am I the person that's capable in my current state of achieving that? Whether it's like, I want to, I hear a lot of people like, oh, like I want to make 200 grand a year. You hear like that a lot of people our age, or I want to buy a house. It's like, okay, like, are you the person capable? Like what you believe with your skills, your traits, your knowledge, everything up to this point, are you capable of doing that? Or is there a gap? If there's a gap, attacking that. So like,
yeah,
I was curious if you kind of noticed that sense, or
I've always had imposter syndrome at every level. I feel like if I'm not uncomfortable, like don't feel a little bit like I'm out of like if I'm not a little uncomfortable, then I feel like I'm not pushing myself hard enough, if that makes sense. So like if I'm in a room, even, our board meetings, for instance, if I don't feel a little uncomfortable, I'm not stretching hard enough. Like I'm not pushing hard enough. And if you get to the point, I think, where your preparation is lacking or you're showing up because you maybe master, that was my biggest problem, honestly. When you talk about me looking for an executive coach, is like I got comfortable being able to, I don't have to prepare super hard to do certain things. You want to put me in front of a group of people and talk, I didn't have to prepare very much. That's a terrible, terrible way to prepare yourself to be in future rooms. You should be preparing and studying and learning, and you should go into a boardroom stressed a little bit, like, oh, did I learn everything I needed to? Do I have all the data together that I need? Like, you should feel a little bit of like tenseness, to know that you're preparing yourself properly. If you don't feel that way and you feel like you can kind of do it in your sleep again, I think you're probably, either not challenging yourself enough or you're not preparing well enough. You're not giving your best self to the people that deserve it. Those board members, they they put a lot of time and energy into being, helping us accelerate the business. And when you come ill prepared, that's a real bummer for them, and it's a bummer for the company. And so those are all those things where, when you go into big sales calls with Cummins International or whoever it will be, did you prepare properly? Are you a little bit nervous? Did you feel like I have everything in order? Have I thought through things in different ways? Have I maybe even done some role play with my boss? Like all those things, like, hey, this could happen or this could happen. Like that preparation level will prepare you for whatever else next you want to do. This goes back to sales being the game to me. Like, and you get to do that at every level, whether you're an SMB, commercial, enterprise, or like I say, in leadership, it doesn't matter. So, but yeah, I think that having a little bit of that imposter syndrome, I think, is healthy. Feeling a little bit out of place in certain places, like, well, man, I don't know that I'm ready for that, is healthy. But obviously don't get yourself in a situation where you shouldn't be in. I'm not prepared for that. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, getting thrown in the deep end a little bit is good.
I heard a good reframe for imposter syndrome for people struggling with it was like it's usually a good indication that you're doing something good or you're on to bigger and better things. And I
I would
always
agree
like that
with that.
reframe.
The most I've ever felt it were in the situations where I feel like I did some of the best work too.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
feel
like
like
when
you
I
take a
get
step
like,
back and
oh, don't know what I'm going to do. Like I feel a little overwhelmed, or what, or like, people are going to find me out. No, like get to work, man. You know,
yeah, I feel like if people take a step back and see like why they have that feeling to begin with, it's like it's probably because they're, like you said, getting pushed to a new endeavor, or they're maybe it's a promotion or getting into a boardroom presentation that people they don't feel welcome. It's like if you look at it from a different perspective, like you're actually doing some really cool things that, like you said, if you just look at it in the terms of growth and knowledge and playing the long game, then
and I love the analogy. I mean, you're the one that actually set it up. But when we talked about like the, changing your batting stance or your grip on the bat or whatever, it feels super awkward. Like that awkwardness you're feeling typically is you trying to do something better. You're growing and learning, like trying to do it better than you've done it before. And you're not just going into, because like I said, 90% of people are going into just reaction mode. They're just doing how they've always done it. They're going to show up and speak the same language they always speak. They're going to show up and they're not actively thinking and going, I'm going to do this better. And and it feels weird and wow, and awkward, and this is uncomfortable. I didn't ask the right question, but I'm in it and I'm getting better every time. And that kind of drives that imposter syndrome. Like, man, I'm not good at this. Man, I'm not really. No, you are. The reason why you're good at it is because you're trying to get better at it. Like you're doing the things most people won't do. Most people are going to shy away from the uncomfortable again. So, yeah, I think it's a healthy thing to be feeling. If you're like, man, I'm not feeling good about this. It's like, yeah, that's because you're probably doing something that you're trying to get better at.
It's also helpful for me to just understand that that's normal for high performers. Have you heard of the study they did, Jed, where they studied all these high performing people and they came out with basically three traits that separated them from the rest?
What was
Um,
it?
so number one was that they thought they were better than everyone, or that more so that they thought they were meant for bigger things than other people were. The second thing, in contradiction to that almost, they had a severe level of anxiety or imposter syndrome at all times that kept driving them forward, like you're just talking about, of I'm not good at this, I'm not as good as I think, I'm not growing how I
Someone's gonna
want to
find
be.
me out. Yeah, I'm gonna
Someone's
get
going to
found
find me
out.
out. Just
Yeah.
they have this constant drive to think that they can do big things, and then something pushing them from behind to say, like, you're not as good as you need to be, to continually push them forward. And the third thing was impulse control. So just the ability to take those things and hone in on a single thing and not get distracted.
That is fascinating. I
But
mean, you can see it in people's lives. You can.
for sure. And I think for
Does
me, a
that
lot of
first one
times,
kind of line up with discipline? Like they're
Mhm.
disciplined.
Yep,
Like they can really easily lock into whether it be a physical workout or whatever, but they can lock in and achieve a goal that they're going after,
the
right?
skill of focus.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. That totally makes sense to me.
But that was a helpful reframe for me to understand that that's what high performers feel. So like when I feel that, I think a lot of people then judge that feeling of themselves and like, oh, I shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't feel like I have this imposter syndrome or something like that. So that was just helpful for me to say, hey, high performers feel this way. So that's a good thing that I feel this
You'll
way.
have to send me that stuff. I actually really like that. I mean, it is good for me to hear too, because I think we all, to some way, shape, or form, suffer from it. And like you said, I think a lot of us feel like we've been given so much talents or gifts that we have so much to, like, we should be doing more, right? Like that, back to the first one. Like, not that we feel better than other people, but we feel like we're called to something more, right?
Yep.
So, love it.
Well, we're at the top of the hour here.
Yeah, I could do this all day though, Jed. You are
That flew, man.
always a
That
pleasure.
actually went by really fast.
Yeah, kind of. Any last things you want to wrap up on, or any topics you want to?
No, I would just, I think, reiterate my most important thing, and the thing I found the most satisfaction is my personal family, like my kids. And so every endeavor that I do at work, I want to leave a legacy for my family and my kids, and I want to take the same things I'm learning and help my kids learn them earlier. And they all translate. That's why, like I said, I think why athletes end up being so successful, and by other, like, the attributes and things that we're learning at work translate so well to those things. And it's been so fun to, I think, get some wisdom in my of finding good balance, but also chase my dreams as well, because your kids are watching. And if you're a guy that gets so focused on helping them do something, but you're not doing it yourself, they mimic, they watch. And so I think as you guys build legacies for your future families and what you're doing, remember that balance is super important, and being there and being in front of them, but go set a really good example of what it looks like. And you're doing it right now. Like I say, you're in the work, you're building the foundation, and you'll build a great generation of future Stutz and Ingles, right? So excited for you guys to keep growing and learning, and thanks for having me. No, I really appreciate it.